Okay, we're going to start allowing attendees to enter. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, regardless of where you are dialing or interneting in from. We're still going to let people filter in here. We have a lot of people registered for today's session. I'm really excited to have Paul Stamets joining us via moderating again for us. Thanks everybody for joining us. This has been this is our most popular session in our entire 7-session psychedelic science webinar series. We have over 2,000 people registered to potentially gain access as attendees to this session today. So thanks everybody for joining us. This is an immensely popular topic. I'm going to give a quick technical introduction in case you're just joining us on Zoom today. We're going to be collecting questions for Paul via the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. So using Zoom, you'll click the Q&A box and you'll type them in. Any questions that go into the chat box, that's great, but we're not going to look at them and they won't get to Paul. So make sure to get your questions in there. Zoom also has this really cool feature where you can upvote. So if you see a question in there that you would have asked or you really like or you want to have answered, upvote those and we'll prioritize those questions. Recommend that you close any other programs you have running. That'll help Zoom run a little bit more efficiently. If you have any problems, try closing, restarting, rejoining via the same link. That solves about 99% of problems. If you have any questions about the webinar, you can email webinars@maps.org and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Any feedback, technical issues you're having, you can write there too, although we ask that you check the Zoom preferences and Zoom tech support first. This is being recorded, so anybody who's paid for access to this webinar series and this session will gain access to this recording afterwards, including Paul's slides. Again, just a reminder, put your questions down in the Q&A box. We've already got a couple down there. I'll continue to engage you in the chat and we'll do whatever I can. There's a lot of folks joining us. We have over 600 now in the room. So I'm going to turn this over to my amazing colleague, Dr. Bia Labate, who's going to be moderating today and speaking with Paul today. I'm Brad Burge, MAPS. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn off my video and get us going here. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks all MAPS team for all your continued efforts. Welcome, Paul. So my name is Bia Labate and I've been moderating and hosting this series. I'm a public education and cultural specialist at MAPS. I also work in the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. And this webinar, as I've been saying here, is envisioned to be able to bring academic knowledge and research and practices of the field of psychedelic science into a lay audience, to the general public. We all would like to give people a chance to interact with our speakers and learn the background of their research and their activities and have curiosities and see what's behind the scenes sometimes. So have a more opportunity for direct contact. We also like to welcome the public to share their concerns or wishes on which ways they would like to see the field evolve, the research evolve, and just raise what's in their minds and hearts. And it's a true pleasure to have Paul Stamets here today, who's an icon and a celebrity in this field. And above all, he's a really friendly guy and very accessible, which is extra appreciated considering he is so famous. And he doesn't have anything of that ego of those people that got a lot of attention, which shows that, you know, he has his heart in the right place and his roots in his fungi kingdom and his practice as a hiker, astronomist, biologist, a lot of words that I don't even know how to say. A lot of specific vocabulary. I'm sure that he can introduce himself better to all of you. Of course, some of you know who he is already, but to us, it's a true pleasure. Paul has been a supporter and ally of MAPS, has donated his time and his friendship and his energy and his wisdom throughout the years in multiple different initiatives that is not taken for granted, that is much appreciated by us. And, you know, I think Paul has a special message because he has been talking about the relationship between man and nature and our ancestral roots and how fungi have been around for billions of years, and we are, you know, just this tiny short piece of human history compared to them. and on the importance of acknowledging this big web of life and nature and interconnectedness, and how ironic that we're sitting here in times of COVID-19, in times of climate change. So we want to definitely pick Paul's brain on all of these fronts. I'm sure he has things to say. Paul has also been a passionate advocate of the idea of plants as wholes, and of the entourage effect, and of the importance of dealing with the subjectivity and the entity of the fungi and the plants in itself. So that's a bit different than the medical approach, the FDA clinical trials track, so to speak. But there, for sure, there are continuities and similarities between his work and what MAPS does, but maybe in some aspects they are different. So we want to learn about those things. The famous controversy, natural plants and single molecules. What do you think? What does Paul think? And this brings us to the road of the topic that is also super hot, of access. How are we going to have access to psychedelics, as we're advancing this new decade, the new blossom, 2020 and onwards. And that's my intro for now. Paul is going to talk with us, and then we'll connect back on question and answers. We have over 2,000 attendees. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you again, Paul, and the whole MAPS team. And the word is with you, Paul.
Well, thank you, Via. And I'm honored to be here. And thank you, everybody globally. This is a global community, and mushrooms are an arc across cultures and time. So this is a unexpected benefit of the COVID-19, is the fact that the internet is now connecting us all. So I like to have an hour and a half. I have about 45 minutes of a PowerPoint that I'm going to present. That will be accessible on the MAPS website. And so I have been studying psilocybin mushrooms since I was about 17 years of age. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Columbiana, Ohio, a very conservative town. And I grew up in a house of the youngest one of 5 children. And there was a complete laboratory in the basement. And my older brother, John, ran the laboratory. He went on to Yale to major in chemistry. And my brother Bill went on to Cornell, and my sister went on to Ohio State. And after they departed the house, the laboratory, which was I was banned from it, then I had the whole laboratory to myself. So I always looked up danger to not bring near flame. And a few explosions, but didn't burn down the house. But in retrospect, I should have had better supervision, I guess. My brother's concerns were well-founded. So I always dreamed about having a laboratory and being in the country and being a country scientist. I'm right now in a remote island in British Columbia. I came up here basically, and as I drove up here, I was wondering if they're going to shut the border. And soon after I arrived, they indeed did. So I'm in somewhat isolation, but I've been able to do an enormous amount of work. And so I'm very excited about the research, some of which I'll be presenting today. And I am one person, to be clear, in the continuum of experts that span the millennia. So even though my voice is being heard today more prominently than maybe some others, there are new leaders, younger people on the horizon who are going to pick up the torch and carry this further, just as I have picked up the torch and carried it from my ancestors and from other shamans and other people in the know. I don't like to use the word cognoscente. That kind of has a negative tone to it, but there are basically experts in mycology throughout all cultures and time. And the eclectic knowledge of fungi is very much isolated just to a few individuals. And the reason being is in our viewscape with plants and animals, we have contact daily, weekly, monthly. We see these organisms, we interact with them, we have a familiarity factor with them. But mushrooms that pop up and disappear in 4 or 5 days are mysterious. Where they come from? They suddenly popped out of the ground and they're gone in 4 or 5 days. And so that which is so ephemeral, but so powerful, some can kill you, some can feed you, some can heal you, and some can send you on a massive spiritual journey. And that spiritual journey is really how I've gotten here today. I consider these magic mushrooms as being powerful medicines for the soul. And we can subdivide the definition of the soul in 100 different ways, but it's for the psyche, it's for mental well-being, it's for creativity, it's for mental health, it's for optimistically navigating into the future with actionable solutions that can protect the commons. And I think the message that most all of us get from these magic mushrooms, especially the deep journeys, is that not only are we all interconnected, but everything around us has a voice. Everything around us is communicating to us. And we have such a small sliver of reality that we operate within. And when that window of reality is opened up, then I think we're just astonished at how much more there is that we don't know. And the enormity of the knowledge in nature is a deep well that we're just beginning to extract from and understand. I think nature is all intelligent, and we're Neanderthals with nuclear weapons walking across the landscape. So, but I want to bring attention to a few of my books. Some of you are aware of them. Some of you are not aware of them. But this is Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World, which I actually doing a rewrite of right now, and hopefully we'll have that done in a few months. And then another book is Mycelium Running, How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World. This book has a lot of traction because a lot of environmental applications of mushrooms. Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushrooms, which is my 600-page treatise on cultivation. And another book I co-authored, which is The Mushroom Cultivator. Now, I have a few other books, but those are the primary ones. And I see psilocybin mushrooms at this point in time as being instrumental for creating a paradigm shift. And I have very good reasons for saying that. Because I'm not, I don't have to answer to a university. I don't have to answer to an institution, a company. I've been somewhat, I would say fearless, but I've been able to take ideas and run with them further than most people would dare. And this is amazing that it's come full circle now, and psilocybin mushrooms are being looked upon medicinally, because I was treated like a leper. I would go to these conferences, the North American Mycological Association conference, for instance, in the in the mid to late 1970s. I had long hair and a long beard, and there really just be a big zone of space around me, because I obviously was interested in psychedelics, and the other people there were not. They were uncomfortable. And they were uncomfortable for a very good reason, is that they would find chanterelles and matsutake or pine mushrooms or porcini and oyster mushrooms. These would come in the display tables all the time. But it wasn't until the hippies in the Pacific Northwest started bringing in psilocybin mushrooms growing around wood chips. It was the advent of beauty bark, of chipping wood for landscaping around buildings, that suddenly psilocybin mushrooms showed up in huge quantities around institutions like universities, technology companies, courthouses, law enforcement facilities, churches. And so mushrooms seem to have this great sense of humor of making themselves known where they're most needed. And so these mycologists many of them became my friends and mentors, were taken by surprise. In 30, 40 years, they had never seen a psilocybin mushroom. And suddenly these young people were bringing these mushrooms in quantities, saying, what are these? And they're magic mushrooms. And so the mycologists were taken aback, because suddenly there was a surge of interest with mushrooms that they were not experts on. I joined the Pacific Northwest Key Council, specialized in the taxonomy of the Stropharia family, which includes Psilocybe, Hypholoma, and Stropharia. Many of you know about Stropharia cubensis. Stropharia means it has means sword belt, literally. It's got a membranous ring around the stem. And so I started studying and doing a taxonomy comparatively of the literature, but the majority of literature citations in the libraries had been removed by razors. People were so eager to get information that they would steal the pages out of the textbooks and journals that had anything to do with psilocybin mushrooms. That was reflective of the interest in getting information. So I spent enormous amounts of time in the library at the University of Washington, in the basement, the science library, and then started developing these taxonomic keys, and then was self-taught largely. Then I went to the Evergreen State College and met Professor Dr. Michael Bugh, a PhD chemist. I'll talk about him in a few minutes. And that began sort of my career, so to speak, academically with psilocybin mushrooms. So, Bia, I'm going to launch into this PowerPoint, but I wanted to give a pause here in case you wanted to have any questions that you want to interject before I go into this presentation.
No, I'm fine. I'm excited. From stealing references in the books to, 2020, where we are at. And I just think you're an active player on making this become more, visible. So we want to hear you and delve into the PowerPoint.
Okay, and this PowerPoint will be available, and I'd like to give credit where credit is due, so I will definitely acknowledge many other people. So is this now visible to everybody? Bia, are you able to see this?
I can't see it yet. Let me check with the team. Can Brad and Bryce check if you can share Paul's screen? It's not visible yet.
Okay, I'll back out.
Paul, if you click share screen, select your desktop, and then click the bottom right confirm button, we should be able to see it after you've selected the desktop window, and then the confirm blue button at the bottom.
Okay, I am there, share screen. I'm a Luddite, folks, and I'm going to share.
Looks great, thank you.
Yeah, roger that. We're good? All right, Myconauts, brace for impact.
Myconauts.
Okay. So psilocybin mushrooms in culture and consciousness. This is the subject that MAPS suggested I cover. A huge shout out to MAPS and Rick Doblin and Leanna and many of the other supporters of MAPS. Via Bryce and Brad, also deep gratitude to all of you. This slide, which was originally made by my brother Mark Hayden from MAPS Canada. I've added some more universities to it. A good friend of mine, Bill Linton from USONA, corrected me more or less, saying, Paul, here's another half dozen to a dozen more institutions and universities. But these are the universities and institutions that are currently approved to do studies on psilocybin and other psychedelic substances for clinically, human clinical studies for a variety of endpoints. And this is really important to describe. When people ask me, like, what's the best medicinal mushroom? What's the best mushroom to consume? I always like to ask, what is your target? What is your purpose? Because it's hard to paint the canvas with one brush. There are species specificity factors and target specificity factors depending on your intentions, your needs, the trauma that you face, your end goals, etc. So, but this should give, especially physicians that are watching this, this should give you confidence that these have gone through IRB, institutional review boards at these major universities, approving clinical studies based on the safety and potential utility of psilocybin and these other substances for therapeutic benefit. Another photograph or image here, a graph from Nutt et al. 2010, which I just found was astonishing. It was the inherent toxicity, the harm potential, that's the harm to users or harms to others of many of the classic drugs. Now, alcohol, that's a big one. A lot of us drink alcohol. My father drank alcohol. He was an alcoholic, especially hard liquor, and he got angry. I drink a beer I get friendly. I've never gotten angry. Well, that to me really shows you that drugs interact with the individuals differently. And so this also is a little bit complicated because then you would try to do a clinical study. You want to amortize the net benefits. So we'll have individual sensitivities. Psilocybin is pretty interesting in that we sometimes have non-responders. A classic example is my dear professor and a wonderful woman who is one of my major mentors, Kit Skates, at the Mycomedia conferences that we did in the late 1970s and through the 80s and early 90s. She ingested the equivalent of 20 to 30 grams of psilocybin mushrooms dried weight. We started her off at 1 or 2 grams. She was well learned. She was not psychedelically experienced. She was psychedelically naive. And she had read the literature enough that she trusted myself and my professor. We had a DEA license that we were covering our research, and she was an avid mycologist who had published a lot as well. So she definitely has an academic interest. She did not feel any effect. It was an extraordinary example. There are non-responders. So individual synchronicities of patients or people taking these substances should be taken into consideration. But the point is that psilocybin and psilocybin mushrooms are some of the least toxic plants with powerful psychomimetic effects that have the least toxicity in this array of other substances. I want to do a shout out to a new initiative, the IP34. This just came into me a few hours ago. This is an initiative for legalizing psilocybin therapy in the state of Oregon. So this is the first state initiative that's very, very close to achieving the number of assigned signatures necessary to put this on the ballot come this fall. So 130,000 collected of the 145,000. Big shout out to Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, and Michael Pollan, all who've tweeted and Instagrammed about this the past few days, and especially David Bronner and Bronner Soap. It's hard to find anyone to compare to David Bronner. He is a true eco-warrior. He walks his talk. He's far more courageous than anyone I've ever met on this scene. His heart is in the right place, and he is now actually using commercially a vehicle to spread the word about IP34. So if you look at that, there is a website there, yes, on nip34.org. The Y there is kind of hard to see. So if you are in Oregon or know other people in Oregon, please let them know about this, and you can read this this new initiative in its entirety. A non-branded website that I populate. I'm a victim of Google Scholar alerts. There's no advertisements. There's no branding on this. This is written mostly. I put this together in association with 2 of my employees, and we scour the scientific literature. And this is a great place to find peer-reviewed references. I think there's over 30 peer-reviewed references on mushroomreferences.com that you can look, and this is a good thing to point to physicians or other researchers who poo-poo this subject, and they said, where's the science? And this is oftentimes what we have to overcome is the ignorance. Oh, let me re-describe that. Is the illiteracy, the not being informed. Everyone likes to have an opinion, and everyone has an opinion about mushrooms. It's astonishing to me how many physicians say some of the stupidest things I've ever heard about mushrooms, and yet they've never published on the subject, but they'll venture opinions. I guess that is the hubris of any expert who is used to getting all the attention and endorsements because they're so smart, and yet in this subject field, we face huge hurdles in trying to get people to overcome, to go up the learning curve. So this is a real good reference place to find lots of good articles. And I say this with some sarcasm because I've faced this all my life. And when you drill down to a true expert, They will love the fact that you ask them for references. They will love the fact that you're in common and trying to find the truth and the substance that supports these ideas. Some experts feel offended when they're challenged and their hubris is threatened, and they react in a retaliatory way to diminish you individually. Well, this is the way of human beings, I guess. So moving on. So I like to show this because I was fascinated by the Stoned Ape theory. I call it a hypothesis. And so I started looking at how many primates actually consume mushrooms. And this study came out of Australia in an Australian journal. And there is 23 primates that consume mushrooms, 23 being humans, we're primates. The Golgi monkey is up to 35% of his diet is fungi, more than 12 times its body weight. Now, why I think this is illustrative, it speaks to a long ancestral use of mushrooms by primates for survival. And these primates know which mushrooms are edible, which ones are poisonous, which ones will lead to sustenance and survival, and which ones won't. So the body intellect of understanding the importance of mushrooms for survival is deeply rooted in the evolution of hominids. So around 2 million years ago, our brains suddenly increased by 2 to 3 times. Homo sapiens appeared about 200,000 years ago. 40,000 years ago, the second migration, the successful one, made it into Europe of Homo sapiens. But Neanderthals also were co-occurring and had been in Europe and before Homo sapiens appeared. And yet within 4,000 years of contact, we made Neanderthals extinct putatively. So this rapid rise in the brain cavity and the cerebral cortex in particular, Homo erectus went extinct 75,000 years ago. The Homo sapien brains, you know, some say as soon as 200,000 years ago, there's a sudden increase in brain size. So there's a range of 2 million to 200,000. But it was coincident with climate change, which is interesting. So the hypothesis, a great image by Alex Gray, one of the greatest artists living today, talks about glossolalia, the ability under the influence of psilocybin mushrooms to articulate new thoughts, to come up with new words, to expand the intricacy of language, because that's how we are communicating our thinking. So I won't show this. This is an animation from my good friend Louis Schwartzberg, and it speaks to Terence and Dennis McKenna's hypothesis on the stoned ape. Basically, our primate ancestors came out of the trees during climate change, across the savanna. They find scat, they consume mushrooms, and then 20 minutes later, we have liftoff. And they're catapulted into this extraordinary state of heightened consciousness. Now you're hungry, you share it with your loved ones, your mates, your children. So it's a group, oftentimes a group experience. The floodgates of the senses are opened, and suddenly you have a state of consciousness that is far different than normal reality. This is something that a lot of us have experienced. We know how profound this would have been to anyone, even to people who have not consumed these today. When they have these experiences, it's oftentimes described as the ineffable. It's impossible to communicate with our language today what people are experiencing. So Psilocybe cubensis is the most common psilocybin mushroom in the world consumed. It grows in a wide variety of the dung of ungulates, including elephant, hippopotamus, zebra, horse, buffalo, cow. But these are bodacious mushrooms. These are quite large. So again, if you're hungry, you're going across the savanna, you're tracking animals, you look for footprints, you look for scat, you encounter these mushrooms, the likelihood of you ingesting them is extremely high. Now, it wouldn't happen once, twice. It would happen millions upon millions upon millions of times over millions of years. This speaks to epigenesis, the stimulation from the environment, on our evolution that then results in us coding for new proteins genomically. If those proteins lead to a successful outcome, then through evolution, they're favorably selected for. So Terence would call it the theory. I disagree, it's a hypothesis. And I've been saying for many years, this is an unprovable hypothesis. And I'm beginning to change my thinking. Of course, how can we measure something that would create epigenetic neurogenesis over millions of years? We don't have that time scale available for science. But I call it a hypothesis because there's several definitions, but theory is a hypothesis and been tested by science and factually supported. A hypothesis is an educated guess. You're speculating. And then you go to try to find the evidence to support your hypothesis, and it merges, it evolves eventually into something that's more defensible as a theory. Well, let's go back and what we know in the archaeological record. This is a Sicilian rock painting from 7,000 years ago. The first image you'll see here is the original art of the northern Nigeria 7,000 years ago. And then my friend Kat Harrison and then Jonathan Meter redrew these, but they're true to form. And you can see that this artist wanted to communicate something very excited about mushrooms. And the fact that mushrooms have been, even to this day, are stored in honey, especially in the tropics, where there's such high humidity, the mushrooms rot so quickly. Honey is a well-known preservative. So putting mushrooms in the honey would likely result in psychoactive meads. I know even today, people are making psychoactive meads by putting mushrooms in honey. But very interesting, when I was being a lover of beer and mushrooms, I was shocked to see that the Bavarian Beer Act of 1516 specifically banned mushrooms from being used in beer. So this is in Europe, in the Germanic regions of Europe. The Bavarian Beer Act specifically banned the use of mushrooms and henbane and other plants and restricted it basically to the use of hops. So there is the original art, there it is true to form. Other pictographs that were found in northern Nigeria, and at this time it was called a Sicily in a jar, means the plateau of running rivers. This is again before climate change. Now the Sahara Desert is encroached. This is a very, very arid and dry region. These are figures that are running, and you can interpret this in many ways. The wonderful thing about art is that it is a written history, and the intentions of the artist, I think, are clear to us. Of course, we are speculating, but are those ideas, are those spores, are they both? And that excites people and helps them in their adventures. So we move forward to about 400 BCE, and this is a codolith where Demeter is giving Persephone, her daughter, a mushroom before she goes into the underworld in the fall. And this speaks to the secrets of Eleusis, the Eleusinian mysteries, and Greek European culture. Great books by Carl Ruck. Also, The Road to Eleusis, Unveiling the Secret of the Mysteries of R. Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD and psilocybin, Carl Ruck, Peter Webster, and Houston Smith. The Eleusinian mysteries rites were practiced for over 1,000 years, some say longer. A great terrestrion was built in Greece, and you were given one chance in a lifetime to go with the equivalent of about the average age of about 3 months worth of wages. Sworn to secrecy, you're not going to reveal what the mysteries were. More than 1,000 people would travel, and they go to a great telestron, which is basically a great stadium with steps, and there would be a ritual to Demeter and Persephone. And they would take a sacred substance, which they have then made the argument that the sacred substances were fungal, either ergot or psilocybin mushrooms. It occurs in the fall when Psilocybe semilanceata, to this day, grows around that telestron ecosystem. So they were very much tuned into grain culture, and these psilocybe mushrooms also co-occur in grain, as does ergot, Claviceps purpurea. On the other side of the world, the Mesoamerican culture had a long history of the use of these psilocybin mushrooms. So the point is, indigenous people all over the world, whether you're from a European background or if you're First Nations or if you're Mesoamerican in the quote unquote new world, never was a new world to them. But the idea is that there is a commonality in the respect and the reverence for these mushrooms that can be seen across cultures and through time. R. Gordon Wasson then published an article in Life magazine with Roger M. and the first excellent field guide to psilocybin mushrooms, delivered to tens of millions of Americans during the middle of the Cold War on their doorsteps. And this really was the Wasson and his group. Jonathan likes to make sure the history is correct. That I think Don Pablos Rico was the first one that he is aware of that actually were the interface between the indigenous people and the academic community. I also wanted to mention that some people have stated this, and I knew R. Gordon Wasson. I attended about a half dozen of his lectures, and in every single lecture, he made it a point to give credit to Valentina, his wife, who is Russian. And their marriage was this union of mycophobia, which R. Gordon Wasson grew up in an English environment, the fear of fungi, and the Russians, mycophilia, the love of mushrooms. But R. Gordon Wasson, without exception, would share credit for this interest in this field and the building of knowledge, and gave ample credit every single lecture that I attended to Valentina, to the point he'd be crying, just remembering her. So Michael Bugh on the left, Dr. Alexander Smith, who wrote a monograph in 1957, also 1958, and Michael Loggia on the genus Psilocybe with Rolf Singer. Lower left is Dr. Daniel Stuntz, and then Kit Skates is the one I mentioned, who took a Herculean dose of psilocybin mushrooms and felt no effect whatsoever. And that's what I look like. So I was a lot hairier back then in some ways. So this is the great psilocybin mushroom expedition that we were involved in the 1970s. There's Dr. Gaston Guzman, who wrote the monograph on the genus Psilocybe from Mexico. Jonathan Ott went to study with him. Gary Menzer, an amazing man. I don't know this other person's name. There's Stephen Pollack, who was a physician from San Antonio, Texas, myself, and Dale Leslie. So Gary has passed on. Stephen Pollack was assassinated. I was the last person besides his killer who talked to him. I was on the phone with Stephen Pollack when someone came to the door, and Stephen had to put down the phone, and the person who killed him, he died a very horrible death. You can read about this in Harper's Magazine. I gave a talk at the Telluride Mushroom Conference. I did a shout out at 31 Writes an investigative story on the death of Stephen Pollack. I had inside information. It's an extraordinary story, so please read it. The likely suspect, and they killed him, was a law enforcement officer who was corrupt, who was trying to steal money that Stephen had. We did a series of psilocybin mushroom conferences, began in 1979. 1976 with the Miller-Sylvania State Conference outside the Evergreen State College. 1977 was, 78 was Port Townsend. And then we did a series of micromedia events. And there's Jonathan Ott on the far right, Jeremy Bigwood, Gaston Guzman, Dale Leslie, myself, Jim Jacobs, and Stephen Pollack. So Dr. Michael Bugh received a DEA license because of expertise in chemistry. And he mentored Jonathan Ott, Jeremy Bigwood, and myself. It's extraordinary that this one professor tutored 3 students, and collectively between us, we've written about 20 books on psychedelics and psychedelic plants and mushrooms. We continue this research conferences. I'm a merry prankster. I knew Ken Kesey and the Grateful Dead community. I also knew Sasha Shulgin and a lot of the researchers that were involved in psychedelic chemistry. And so I realized I was sort of the nexus point between these 2 communities. So I brought them together, and we had the final Micromedia Conference at Brighton Bush Hot Spring. And there's Dr. Andrew Weil, Sasha and Ann Shulgin, Gary Linkoff, David Aurora, many other, and there's Michael Bew down at the bottom, Satit Taitakun, etc. Then the psychoactivity conferences continued and they moved to Amsterdam. The slide over to the right shows, again, many of those same people, myself, and then Albert Hofmann, who presented, as well as Christian Retsch. So some of the other principal featuring people. So Bea, if you would give me a time check, since I don't have the ability of looking at the time.
Well, thank you.
I want to make sure I get at least 20 minutes for questions. So
yes.
Let me know. Okay?
You were psychic. I was thinking about this. So we are at 12:40. If you want to go 20 minutes more, we can have 30 minutes of questions and answers. You're in slide perfect. 20 out of 50. So
good. That's perfect. No, I'm not psychic. I'm B mushrooms, and this is what happens. So there's lots of studies that are out there, but I like to really approach this to convince some of the skeptics out there. Now, association is not causation, but it can be. So we need to disambiguate cause and effect here. But the association cannot be dismissed. So in a DSHS survey, 480,000 people, convicts, people in prisons, they noticed in the anonymized surveys, there is a single use of psilocybin. There's a 27% decrease of larceny and theft, 22% decrease odds for property crimes, and 18% decrease of odds for a violent crime. So consider this. The societal benefit is huge. I have a troubled family member, one of my offspring, who has been incarcerated and has had a really rough life. And seeing what's happening with the court system, its inefficiency, how it criminalizes innocent people oftentimes, it's just brutally unjust and inefficient. If you could reduce the amount of people going into prisons and the harm that they then emanate outwards, their family members, to their neighbors, to strangers, the law enforcement community is just overwhelmed with individuals who are committing these crimes, or oftentimes are drug addicts. Think of the societal benefit. These are non-addictive substances. So for those of you who have not taken these mushrooms, the most common refrain after a high dose of psilocybin mushrooms is, there's no way I'm going to do that again for a long time. These are like anti-addictive by nature. You have to sit with it and think with it. And I think psilocybin makes nicer people. This is a really interesting study, again, a meta-analysis between the ages of 16 and 70. And it turns out that individuals, men who have experienced using LSD or psilocybin, had a decreased odds for perpetuating physical violence against their current partner. Statistically significant. Curiously, this relationship did not extend to females. Men, obviously, because testosterone tend to be more aggressive. But think of that. If your partner had one LSD or psilocybin experience, they're less prone to commit violence against you. Extraordinary potential benefit here. Then the other thing is that psilocybin, it revives emotional responsiveness in individual and empathy, be able to help reconnect with individuals. There is a reset therapeutic mechanism that I'm sure many of your other scientists and researchers have talked about, the default mode network, but the ability of you being able to reframe and rethink and think in a more positive way is able to put a lot of your trauma in perspective. As one person told me, it's like being able to put it in a box, and they know it's in that box now, but now it's contained, and now they can move on with their life. And I think that's, rather than it being all-consuming, is part of who they are. They've reconciled with themselves, and they're moving on. It's not like they're forgetting about it. They're just able to containerize it. Really interesting to me, and this is very much related to me, is that there was a pro-democracy influence, increased nature relatedness, decreased authoritarian political views. So it really kind of removes this alpha male disease that our society has suffered from to a very large degree. Women need to have more of a voice in our democracies. The way of the woman tends to be a lot more cooperative. Generally speaking, of course, there's exceptions left and right. But I'm just saying, overall, the people who engage in psilocybin mushrooms tend to be socially more cooperative and less dominating, and more open to understanding other people's points of view. So we're all blends of men and women. We all are composites, but I think that we should pay more attention to this. And then pro-environmental behavior as well. I think a lot of us have had this. We know the earth is in crisis. What can we do? And we can step up to the plate to make a difference. Now, Robin Carhart Harris, this is his famous connectogram. Many, many people have shown this. It just shows that a lot more integration and a lot more use of neurons in your brain than you would have otherwise. So this, I think, speaks to creativity and the ability to imagine. So let's talk about neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the ability of neurons to grow, regrow, to be able to fork, and more synaptic junctions. So it's a big catch-all phrase, but now we know that neurogenesis is something that we can measure under the influence of psilocybin. So psilocybin, therefore, I can make the argument, psilocybin induces neurogenesis, it induces courage, and it induces kindness. These are leadership skills. Don't you want to follow a leader who's kind and courageous? I mean, that's who I want to follow. I want to follow a leader who has the best interest of our commons in mind and not their own selfish interests. So I think this is a pro-democracy influence that these substances have, making better citizens, reducing crime, improving mental health. These are societal benefits that can be measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And so reducing recidivism, being able to have better citizens, and mentoring a generation with better skill sets. So this is proposed by the researchers at Johns Hopkins. Roland Griffiths, being one of the principal players, is reducing psilocybin to a Schedule 4 substance. Schedule 1 is currently, which means that it has no medical use and a high potential for abuse, both of which are not true. So it is misaligned. We may need an act of Congress, good luck on that, to have it rescheduled, but clearly it is not placed in the correct schedule. It needs to be rescheduled. So I want to quickly mention a mushroom that it also has neurogenic benefits, and this is well-known's lion's mane. 2 clinical studies, Dr. Nawagishi discovered this, well, he discovered it earlier. He was looking for antibacterial components, and they found quite by accident that it stimulated nerve regrowth. So he applied this for mild cognitive impairment, as other people did, and showing that the lion's mane mushrooms clinically could show an improvement and mild cognitive dissonance and to improve cognitive ability. It was further discovered that it removes amyloid plaques. Amyloid plaques are an artifact, oftentimes it's seen in patients, Alzheimer's, and the demyelination, the removal of the myelin sheath on the axons of the nerves, which transmitting the nerve signals, the eroding of that and the formation of amyloid plaques interferes with it. And they found in mouse studies that amyloid plaque were reduced and remyelination occurs, and also behavioral characteristics. I go into this in much more detail in the MAPS, in the talk I give at MAPS in Austin, which is also available on the MAPS website, I believe. So you can get into more of the, I'll get into more of the details in that talk than I can cover at this time. So another example of that, an example of amyloid plaques occurring in the brain. We all will suffer from some form of neurodegeneration. This is a big loss to our society. So not only do we have a loss and the criminalization of people using these sacred substances, but just the consequence of getting older, you have neurodegeneration. So I see an opportunity of using two of these mushrooms together. And we've been starting research with a facility in France called Neurofit. They do preclinical research specifically looking at how to screen drugs for fighting Alzheimer's. And they use a brain-derived nerve factor. And there's a control, and it shows that the lion's mane mycelium, not the mushrooms, this is really important, is counterintuitive, but it's been held up now in repeated tests, not the extracts of the fruit bodies, but the mycelium. It causes neurite outgrowth using pluripotent stem cells. So that's the control, that's the first research that we did. We screened a bunch of strains. Lion's mane mushroom is a delicious, edible, and choice mushroom. But it's the mycelium that is giving the neurogenic benefit. So we started exploring different psilocybin analogs, specifically, and there's a bunch of them, but the ones I'll mention are baeocystin, norbaeocystin, norpsilocin, and we did this also with a control with lion's mane, and I call these X, Y, and Z. All of these compared very, very favorably with lion's mane versus the control versus the brain-derived nerve factors. So this is the ethyl acetate fractions, which pulls out a lot of these compounds. So, but this is what was unexpected. We decided to stack them. And this was a big surprise. So the lion's mane mushrooms are creating about a 14% increase in neurons that are growing. This is within a 2-week period of time. One of the analogs of psilocybin, 7%, 22%. When you add Psi-Z there, Psi-Z, we would call it, with lion's mane mycelium, the predicted cumulative effect of 107 and 114, you're looking at about 122. But we found that we're stacking them together actually synergistically increase neurogenesis as measured by neurite outgrowth to more than 36%. Statistically significant. The error bars there are substantial, but it still conforms to show, no matter how you interpret that, that there is substantial. Now we've done this, we repeated this experiment and we've gotten similar results. So this goes to stacking a natural product with a pure molecule, a molecule that is related to psilocybin that's totally legal, because they're not illegal analogs. So that got us very excited about natural products and using them for neurogenesis and how these mushrooms can be combined. The body intellective knowledge of our society, when we lose Einsteins every day because of neuropathy, is substantial. And so being able to preserve the intelligence of our society for passing on future knowledge, of course, everyone benefits from that. So I see this as a great potential for neurogenesis. So this is an example, it's not a great slide, but this is basically, you measure the neurite outgrowth, the number of junctions, and the number of forking that's occurred. This in case it's a 10-day exposure. This is an article that very few people talk about, but this speaks to microdosing and basically the extinction of the fear of condition response. And I won't go through the details of the tests again, see my maps talk, but basically the microdosing at 1/10 of a liftoff dose of the psilocybin reduced the fear conditioning response in mice far more so than a macro dose. And the fear conditioning test that was done, it took 10 rotations of the absence of a noise previously associated with a pain, i.e. electrocution, a shock. And then at the microdose levels, it only took 2 non-shocking events for them to dissociate fear conditioning, which really makes me think about the benefits of microdosing. And microdosing also doesn't occur one day, it occurs multiple days over time. And that's, gives your cells the opportunity to reproduce. A massive dose of psilocybin for 6 hours, 2 hours to 4 hours for the intensity of the experience really is not within the time window to allow cells to reproduce. So I have a proposed nootropic vitamin complex formula that is taking a less than liftoff dose, you're not feeling an effect. The definition of microdose is you don't feel an effect. So it's equivalent to about 1/10 to 1/20th of a gram of psilocybe cubensis dried weight, stacked with lion's mane and then with niacin. And I'm stacking with niacin to prevent abuse. I want this to ultimately be an over-the-counter vitamin. And the niacin, as many of you know, 100 to 200 milligrams, you feel itchy, you get red. It excites the endpoints of your peripheral nervous system. And the idea that I have is that in order to drive neurogenesis to the endpoints of your nervous system, oftentimes neuropathies present themselves as loss of sensation at the fingers and the toes and the extremities. Niacin also is a vasodilator. And so for 3 reasons, is delivering these neurogenic compounds to the endpoints of the peripheral nervous system. That's why you feel this tingling. And then stacking it with niacin, if you try to take 10 times as much for a liftoff dose, the adverse effects of this would be so substantial that you'd be disinclined to use it in the future. Fadiman, Dr. Fadiman has a great protocol. I have my protocol. We both just made this up. This needs to be confirmed in clinical settings. But I think this is something where this could greatly benefit the commons. If the fear conditioning response, which is associated basically with PTSD, if we can have medicine for the masses extremely inexpensively, not controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, then I think the benefit for the commons is much more achievable than having to be put into a hospital environment, controlled rooms with doctors and nurses walking around with white coats and not being, and being restricted. How many people can afford to do that? Not very many. So this is a app for iPhones with Quantified Citizen. And this is basically an app for you to be able to measure your microdosing responses. It's got a number of metrics that measures visual acuity, hearing, what you've combined it with niacin, lion's mane, for instance, chocolate, peanut butter, as memory tests, and is able to measure cognitive response over time. Are you cognitively improving or declining? And then by metamining this data, then we should get signal from the noise. Dr. Prem Crisco has been instrumental in co-designing this. And so this app is freely available. Go to microdose.me, and I went through clinical review specifically for this. So I think I'm just about on time, but I want to thank you all, and I want to thank everyone. We are all indigenous to this planet. The Indigenous and First Nations have preserved the rituals of use, which is basically an instruction manual, a map for maximizing benefit of consciousness and for society. A lot of us who came from Europe, we in a sense were the victim, I think, of monotheism, authoritarian religion, and also trying to suppress the indigenous use of these sacred substances in the European theater. We're, in a sense, a lost people. And so these substances, I think, benefiting from the wisdom and contact of indigenous people that are currently practicing these sacred substances can give us a really great benefit. So I just want to give my acknowledgement to indigenous peoples all over the world, especially with the First Nations in North America and Mesoamerica and South America. Okay, I am done.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for your passion and your sincerity. I resonate with so many things that you said. I just want to start by praising you for acknowledging Valentina. Gordon Wasson has become like a famous icon, and Gordon wasn't this and that, and Gordon wasn't this and that, but he did everything together with his wife, Valentina, who has not got the same visibility, and that's a classic example on how women stay on background and often not acknowledged. So I think that's especially appreciated. And you mentioned about how the substances might also help us with authoritarian and patriarchal tendencies. So I think that goes hand in hand with that acknowledgement. And I just really like, you know, the fact that you speak the truth and remarked on the stupidity of some medical doctors. And I am an anthropologist, and I get so mad when I see this guy with this bunch of titles after his name, just speaking, you know, whatever he thinks he can say about a subject, because maybe when he was in doing his university years, he had one class that, you know, had 45 minutes, hallucinogens 1, and, you know, saw different slides, doesn't know which one is which, has never seen one in his entire life, has never touched one, has never tried one, hasn't researched anything about it, hasn't published one single paper, but feels he can go, you know, and go in public and state all those fake, you know, research or medical evidence. And that's so hard to clean up after these people. But, you know, I think we're in another phase that also we have a lot of the medical community has reexamined this kind of arbitrary views about the sacred plants, this fungi that has roots in so many cultures and different times. And also want to echo you on my behalf and on the MAPS team on your praising David Bronner. He has been a great ally to MAPS and has just done another pledge towards us. And he has published a fantastic article talking about different legalization or decriminalization initiatives to which he's supporting. One of them is the Oregon that you mentioned, but he has also been supporting other fronts. I'd like to ask my friend Brad to paste this link, do a little shout out for our MAPS bulletin, Commercialization and Access, which is our latest edition. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on your presentation. We have different questions. I'm going to jump onto them. So Blake asks, could you speak on what people may miss out when using synthetic compounds as opposed to the organic matter? If legalized therapeutic use is bound to synthetic compounds, are we missing something that fungi give us in their natural state, whether that be a spiritual sentient thing or secondary active chemicals beyond the ones scientists are isolating?
Excellent question. And my response to that is that the evidence that we have right now is these psilocybin analogs. If you take pure psilocybin, which dephosphorylates into psilocin, so psilocin is actually what's getting you high or giving you this experience. But these psilocybin analogs we know cause neurogenesis. The receptor fields are extremely complex, and the idea of being able to have an entourage of multiple active constituents that cause neurogenesis, logically, we are seeing will be better than a single molecule approach. And so when you're taking a natural form of the mushrooms, you're getting the entourage effect of the other psilocybin analogs. Now, the medicine has evolved and advanced from natural products going to individual constituents, so you can see a direct cause and effect relationship. But now we're looking at systems. Our human immune system is a system, our neurology is a system, and being able to activate as many receptors as possible that leads to beneficial neurogenesis, I think is what these mushrooms do. Moreover, psilocybin and mushrooms, and we know from other mushrooms, and you go to mushroomreferences.com, influence the microbiome. And so the microbiome, we know these mushrooms, especially with turkey tail and other mushrooms that have been studied, they're prebiotics for the microbiome. And much of your immunity response occurs in your stomach. And to have these mushrooms as prebiotics influencing the beneficial bacteria and suppressing the inflammatory bacteria is yet another way, because the inflammatory factors in Alzheimer's have been being very carefully studied right now. It's a neuroinflammation is what is occurring. So when you have inflammatory bacteria that's secreting all these toxins into your body, you're also having neuroinflammation. So I think the natural products approach has a lot of merit. I think in order to go past the regulatory environment, identifying they're called APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, is important. But if you can standardize this to several active ingredients that are most well studied and most profound in their effects, then I think you can standardize natural products to be able to have the benefits of the entourage effect of these analogs for a much better therapeutic outcome than necessarily just using one molecule.
Cool. I want to ask a question, and this is from me, and it's a bit trippy. So I wanted to, like, I met Richard Glenbohr a few years ago in Berkeley. He was the one that coined the term cognitive liberty. And I spent this really amazing afternoon with him. And he was telling me how, you know, back in the day when they created this term, it was something really groundbreaking. And it was just like about the freedom of the mind and how we can, like, you know, have this right to self-determination. But that kind of started to attract also a bunch of weird things together. So he told me that a lot of weird phenomena was starting to happen. You know, somebody would come and like drop a bag of money, or a crazy person was determined that the CIA had implanted a chip in his mind, and the other one would have this other theory that he was captured by an alien. And like when you go to the fringe and you explore consciousness and you push the boundaries, you start to get all. So I was wondering if you could speak to that. Do you get a lot of weird stuff your way, or do you even don't know what is weird? Or
well, that's the nature of the ecosystem that we're in. You know, we are psychonautic explorers going into new territories, and with that, we're going to have outliers. But as we get better in understanding the pharmacology and the usefulness of this, our skill sets will increase. And it's, you know, it adds a lot of color. But I have a phrase I like very much that Voltaire, I think, came up with: don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you're going to say that this field attracts these crazy people, are you going to throw out the research by Johns Hopkins? Are you going to throw out the research by all these other universities that show benefit? Just because you do have some people that are mentally ill to begin with, that take these substances that may not have the right, you know, they have the right people to be able to help them navigate through it. Of course, you're going to have fringe people. But that is the way in any new field of science. Look at the times of Galileo or Copernicus. They were outliers. Well, in their times, they had other people who were outliers. But now we know that they were absolutely correct. So it comes with the territory. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's keep focused on the positive outcomes. Let's become more disciplined about this. Let's not throw away the baby for the bathwater just because we do have some fringe elements that show up on the landscape. You know, in fact, put your arm around them, counsel them, saying, you know, your paranoia is really good. You have a really good imagination, but but bring them back to earth, you know, and try to maximize benefit and minimize harm. I think harm reduction is the key here.
yeah, totally. No, I don't mean to like dismiss the entire field. I rather think it's kind of an interesting anecdote, but then again, I'm already biased because I am, you know, all about the positive aspects of this substances. But yeah, I agree with you, and I resonate to that as well. Of course, there is this craziness. I think all of us who are in the field experience it, and I was just curious if you got a lot of those and how to deal with them. There's a question here about bad interactions of psilocybin and certain mental illness. Do you have any comments about that, in particular bipolar disorder?
Well, I'm not a physician. I can only refer to some of the literature that I've read. Roland Griffiths, in his early studies at Johns Hopkins at higher doses, they found about 30% of the patients described their experience as being negative, adverse. But interestingly, 14 months later, the positive benefits of the 70% of the individuals reported positive benefits. 14 months later, 70% of those people still reflected on those experiences as being positive. But the 30% of the people who had negative experiences, the negativity did not extend beyond that test day itself. So yes, there are people who have negative experiences. If you have a negative experience and is compounded by bad behavior or bad setting, Of course, you don't want to be flying a 747 or running a nuclear submarine high on psilocybin. And then, this just goes without saying, but it's crazy you have to say this. So set and setting has a huge influence in outcome. And so having a safe set and setting, being well prepared, being mentored, having a sitter, a person who's an experience in this area, but who is not imbibing, so they can reassure you that everything is fine. When I eat these substances, like my heart, have I drank enough water? My dog's okay. It's nice to have somebody like, everything is fine, and everything's in control. You don't have to worry about these things. The externalities have been normalized, and you're in a protected envelope. Psychologically, and environmentally, you're secure. Once you know that you are secure, then I think the probable outcomes that are favorable increase massively. So adverse events do occur, and they may speak to deep-rooted trauma that needs therapy. And so the California Institute for Integrative Studies is skilled at this. MAPS is skilled at this. These are people most in need. But I want to put out there that we're all traumatized to some degree. How many are so severely traumatized that they cannot function in society? This is where these medicines can need to be used therapeutically to their best benefit. But I think, frankly, everyone can benefit from these substances under the right controlled set and settings and with the right framework that I just described.
And do you have any particular feelings about the moment we're living in, and whether people should be tripping or that would not be recommendable, or depends?
Well, I don't use the word recommend, and I don't like that word, but I think we're ready for a paradigm shift. Just when the human brain, also during climate change, radically increased, I think we need to have creativity in order to be able to find the solutions to do a course change on this planet that leads to greater sustainability, greater democracy, greater humanity, greater empathy, and being able to support, our context of living in the environment in a sustainable way. I think that now is the time for us to have a quantum leap in the evolution of the human brain and consciousness. So many people have come up with so many brilliant ideas. Kary Mullis, who got the Nobel Prize for PCR, discovered it while he was tripping on LSD. Watson and Crick, one if not both of them, also attribute their being able to come up with a DNA molecule, and some other people were also developing that model, a woman in particular. But I'm saying that under the influences, these are sparks of creativity. And maybe it's that neurogenesis that creates one more synaptic junction between two disparate thoughts that lead to a eureka moment that can change the course of human history. DNA and PCR are two relevant examples. And as you know, Steve Jobs also attributed his innovation ability, and numerous technology people. I go to TED every year. This year, this is going to be virtual. I was treated like a leper also at TED when I first went to TED. The last time I went to TED, I was this friggin' celebrity of all these people who came up to me, privately, and then confessed they came out of the closet or they just experienced. And it's the most profoundly meaningful things that they have experienced, and they're just oozing with kindness and gratitude. So I think when you're creative, you're happier. When you're happier, you're more creative. So insofar as fighting depression, I think these things lead to greater creativity. And those of us who've imbibed in these, we know I'm big into fractals, and I like the color blue. So, but people go, well, what do you mean? And it's like, it's hard to explain what I mean unless you experience this. But those people who experience it, one of the most common also refrains I've received is that I had no idea. And they say it with such reverence and a subdued tone that they go, I had no idea, and I thought I did. How wrong was I? And so I think it's profound that these technology people are becoming more creative and more reverent and and becoming nicer people. Again, psilocybin makes nicer people, makes better citizens, reduces criminality, and I think benefits society.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. We have a lot of questions on different directions. I'm going to take another one. Can you talk about your views on psilocybin and ego death dissolution, and how this might relate to their therapeutic uses?
There's so many other people who are more eloquent in that subject than me. We all have egos, the hubris, I think, of humanity is predictive of its downfall. And so I think authoritarianism is rooted in egocentrism, and the unanimity of feelings and compassion for other individuals is really quite obvious to all of us who know the subject well. But I would defer to a better expert than myself on ego dissolution. That's more of a psychiatrist in the realm of psychiatry than the realm of what I can speak to.
Okay, there's a lot of questions that kind of overlap. You already talked a little bit about the synthetics versus the plants, but people want to know in more detail if you could touch on, Ben is asking if you could briefly touch on synthetic psilocybin production. Do you think that the psilocybin production will affect the popularity of psilocybin containing mushrooms, and might this affect cultivators?
Well, I think some people I've met who are very concerned about potential adverse medical outcomes feel more reassured to have clinicians and physicians and nurses around them in a controlled setting, taking a single substance that can be titrated, that can be measured, that conforms more to the drug model of safety. I understand that need. I think, again, I go back to how many tens of thousands of dollars will it take for you to go into a hospital environment to have a therapeutic session. The majority of people don't have that money. The majority of people who are traumatized do not have that money. Are we going to deny them a medicine that can give societal and personal benefit because of they have to go through a clinician in a clinical setting in order to get an FDA approved substance? Bear in mind, psilocybin became illegal. I'd have to look it up. It was in the late 1960s, Richard Nixon. It was not illegal beforehand for millions of years. Our laws are temporary constructs invented to place controls on access. And you can interpret that 6 ways to Sunday, but that's the way it is. So I think having these substances available has been our history evolutionarily. And it also leads to the democratization of use of these substances. Two of my biggest concerns about the quote unquote underground psilocybin cultivation industry, you want to call it that, is two things. And I may sound like a real conservative here, but I pay a lot of money in taxes. And for all these people to get this so much money, if they're not giving their fair share back to the commons, to the post office, to the fire department, to support the schools, then it's a disproportionate, taking of wealth out of the economy for personal engrossment, whatever. So I think people should pay their fair share because we're all using these resources, and I think tax evasion is wrong. So I would love to say, voluntarily, give 30% of your proceeds to a church, to a nonprofit, to feeding the hungry. That would be wonderful. Can we trust people to do that? No. The second concern that I have is bacterial contamination. A lot of these cultivators, some are good and some are not. And when you have a high humidity, low air exchange environment, and the hygiene is not absolutely up to par, then the co-occurrence of molds and bacteria are commonplace. And so even you get these mushrooms that appear to be good, when they're dried and shriveled up, they're very hard to ascertain their quality. So a lot of adverse reactions, I think, are basically mushroom poisoning that's coming from bacteria that is causing people to become sick. And then they co-occur with the getting high from the psilocybin. And then this then unfortunately elaborates into a negative experience. So I wish that there would be societal controls on quality of natural products to assure that these are being done in the proper fashion. And I don't know how to solve the tax issue. It's like an oxymoron of conflict. But I think innovation has always started, so to speak, in the cellar. And innovators have started businesses in garages. And the innovation and the motivation of citizen scientists have gotten us many of the benefits that all of us enjoy today. So there is sort of a citizen scientist movement, you know, as the undercurrent of this economy that could lead to some really major breakthroughs. So I just call out to people that are doing this, and this is why I have a phrase, nature provides, I don't. Why don't I provide psilocybin mushrooms and have not for decades, for 40 years? Because I feel responsible if someone has a bad trip. I own their karma. If I give someone psilocybin mushrooms and they have a wonderful trip, that's great. But if they have a bad experience and it's horrible, then, you know, I shoulder that responsibility. I'm just not strong enough to be able to do that. And I don't think it's responsible. So I think people should really look, and we should all shepherd each other, is quietly talk to people who may be going astray and give them kind advice, not aggressive, but ask them to, you know, please, you know, abide by these principles that maximize societal benefit and minimize harm. The endotoxins from bacteria contamination is a big, big issue. And many of these cultivators are trying to, you know, make their weight, as it's called. They're trying to, and they're scraping the bottoms of their trays, and they're getting blemished ones or ones with necrotic tissue. If those are put into the mixture, then people can have an adverse event. Basically, it's a form of food poisoning. Some of these endotoxins can be severely toxic. So I'm quite concerned about that.
Thank you. In Brazil, there's a lot of like an etiquette in the ayahuasca world that I'm familiar with, that you shouldn't really invite people to go drink ayahuasca. It's not like your job to tell others what to do, but if they have their own wishes and, you know, express their own calling, you can talk about your experience. But there's a word of cautions with like some people that have like this messianic idea that they should give psychedelics to others. And I think that's a good point about the karma and, you know, the challenges of telling other people what to do. There's a law enforcement person here asking an interesting question. Mr. Paul Stamets, I am in law enforcement and psychology. I would like to help our law enforcement professionals notice and take this information seriously. How? It's by Sarkle.
Well, thank you for your interest, and also to be taken seriously and not vilified. This is a career killer, because it used to be, and even in academia, you know, the field of mycology was never elevated to its current status that's achieving now. I think that the best route is to integrate with MAPS. MAPS has engaged with a number of law enforcement individuals clinically. There's some clinical studies, as you well know, with MDMA for first responders. Law enforcement, you know, I've been a martial artist almost all my life and had ran martial arts schools for many years. And came to know many law enforcement individuals. They were white belts or orange belts, and I had 2 black belts. And they're really in a tough situation. They have a mandate to enforce the law, but they also have a great humanity. But they're always called, often not always, but often called to the forefront when there's problems that need to be resolved, and law enforcement officials that are wasting their time for people smoking marijuana or doing magic mushrooms distracts the resources from doing something other criminal behavior such as violence, and arson, etc. So the best thing I think to do is to communicate with MAPS and to be networked with other law enforcement individuals who's already navigated through this, so you don't go through this by yourself alone without support. Rick Doblin has spoken about this several times, the chief of police in several cities he's communicated with, and these law enforcement officials and officers also have been traumatized. They suffer from PTSD. My partner, Dr. Pam Briscoe, she's seen a lot of people pass. A lot of doctors in her community right now are traumatized watching people die from COVID-19. This is something most of us don't see. And both law enforcement and physicians are put into a high stress environment where they're experiencing trauma, something that most of us only experience maybe a few times in our lifetime. They're experiencing it on a level that we cannot even imagine. So I think this is a really important for mental health. These are not substance abuse. And I would just encourage to reach out to that community that's already been vetted, so you're not a lone ranger trying to do this by yourself, because you could be attacked, you could lose your job, you could be marginalized. And if you have a community of other law enforcement officers who have gravitas, credibility, and who have navigated through this landscape, then you're not going to be alone.
Thank you. We're coming towards the end. All right, I'm going to put the last question here. And again, I just want to remark for you, Paul, that we have 141 questions. So we have
I just saw flashed up. There's a New York City chief of police on this call right now, who is also in support of this. So, let's give support to our law enforcement. They have a tough job, and let's give support to our first responders that are out there on the cusp of this. Many of us have security hiding in our own homes, but what about people in the front lines? These people are truly courageous individuals who need our support in every way that we can.
Yes, we have supported initiatives to donate funds to COVID 2019. MAPS has organized a party, and parts of the funds were destinated to that, and we also supported sacred reciprocity. It's very necessary to remind ways to give back and to honor the people that are at the forefront, as you say. All right, can you comment on chronic self-administration of low-dose psilocybin for months or years? Since this is, some see this as a health supplement regimen, others see this as depleting natural neurochemical systems, for example, harmful. What do you think of that?
A great question, because there is a potential heart valve issue that has been described by some physicians for repetitive use. This is why we need clinical studies. We need to have controlled studies to be able to measure this. So, in traditional Chinese medicine, is consistent with many medical practices, is that you can normalize. Oftentimes, medicines will supplant or replace your endogenous endorphins and pain mitigating responses, and then you become addicted to the drug, as opposed to being able to have your own endogenous responses. So it's a really good question. I don't think anybody knows the answer to this. This is what I would like to see: controlled clinical studies for microdosing. I will resign myself to conceding that it should probably be done initially with a single molecule and elaborate outwards from that, so we have a comparative baseline to use. The complexity of natural products makes baselines harder to discern. And so I think if we do this in a stepwise fashion, what I would like to see is a comparison of microdosing using psilocybin versus microdosing using a natural form, parallel clinical study, side by side, using the same metrics and the same outcomes, to see if this is indeed a concern. But the person who expressed this shares the same concern I do. I love drinking coffee every morning. And when I stop drinking coffee for 3 or 4 days, that next cup of coffee is a zoomer. So I mean, so clearing your receptors to make them more sensitive to these neurogenic compounds, I think, is logical, because you do have endogenous abilities to be able to heal yourself. You don't want to become chemically dependent.
Thank you. We're arriving to our end. I appreciate you mentioning, you know, possibilities of research. We certainly aim with this webinar series to raise people's imagination and show them that there are multiple avenues to follow. And we hope that, you know, you young people, or maybe not so young, but wanting to do a career change or wanting to focus on any of this, there's so much, a wealth of things to study. It's a very virgin territory in many ways, so much to explore, so many potentialities. So there are some great ideas here. I just want to offer Paul the opportunity to say some final words. I don't know if you feel talking anything about the current decriminalization initiatives or any message about the new psychedelic industries or corporations, or anything else you might feel relevant that we didn't touch upon.
Well, I could talk for an hour about some of those subjects. No, I just wanted to just express my heartfelt gratitude to the community, to all of you courageous individuals, to the scientists who are now going on record and standing up for evidence-based science, showing that these compounds have benefit, and that we are at a super critical time. Habitats have immune systems. The loss of biodiversity is leading to this collision course that we're on. We're having zoonotic diseases. COVID-19 is not the only zoonotic virus that we're going to be seeing coming towards us from the near event horizon. We have many of them coming towards us, and they speak to the loss of biodiversity and the loss of community immunity. And so what I really hope that people are inspired that they can not despair for the lack of ability to make positive change. I think we are at a wonderful opportunity to create a paradigm shift by working together for the common goal of being able to increase the health of people and planet. And folks, this is our time. We're all gonna die. What's your legacy? How are you gonna be remembered? What can you do? It's time for all of us to step up to the plate, you know, and be Earth citizens and be good stewards. And I think we have that opportunity. You have a choice. Let's all make good choices to be able to succeed in having a better ecosystem. Without the ecosystem, we do not have life. Fundamentally, we have to support the environment and biodiversity. All of us can do that.
Right on, Paul. If people want to get in touch with you or follow your work, what is the best? What do you recommend? Where can they follow you?
Well, my personal website is paulstamets.com. I have youtube.com/paulstamets. I've got lots of videos and lectures. I have Instagram.com/paulstamets. That's very active. So just stay tuned. And that's probably the best way. I'm pretty active on Instagram and on YouTube and on Facebook. There's a lot of research coming out. We're publishing our goal is to publish 2 peer-reviewed articles in scientific literature per year. We're on track.
Congratulations.
We have Lion's Mane coming up. We have a Garicon coming up. We have analogs coming up. And we're extraordinarily excited by the reach out that we're getting and support from many renowned universities who are looking at this subject very seriously. So it's, in a sense, it's a perfect storm for creativity. So it's wonderful that other researchers now are all collaborating and trying to to advance this knowledge, because we have ancestral knowledge. We've been given it by our ancestors. It's important that we pass it on. And I just want to acknowledge and deep gratitude to especially First Nations and Indigenous people. The concept of 7 generations. It shouldn't be 7 generations though. it should be 7,000 generations. You know, this is what we need to do, is support our descendants by being responsible Earth citizens today.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think, you know, Brad and I, we always make a joke. Are you excited today? And he said, how did you guess? So you summed up. We feel so honored to be talking about the substances. There is a psychedelic renaissance, and I think extraordinarily excited echoes how we feel on this side of the screen too. And I want to invite everybody, you can send your feedback about this webinar. You can reach us out to us. You can reach me at bia@maps.org or follow me in Labate Bia, Instagram or Twitter. We're open to, you know, receiving feedback and suggestions for other topics. I want to invite everybody for the next session on May 7th. We're going to have nothing less but our own Rick Dublin and Amy Emerson, they're going to be talking towards legal psychedelic psychotherapy. So a very central core webinar to what we do here in MAPS. And I want to tell everybody to stay home, stay safe, and keep on tuned. And thank you very much, and see you again next Thursday at the same time. Thanks all the team. Thanks for everybody that makes this happen. Thanks, Paul, for your work and for your passion and for donation of your free time to us. Thank you, people.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.